We are live.
Good afternoon. I'm Shanika Smith. I'm the chair of Equity and Engagement Committee. I'd like to welcome you to our April 18th remote meeting. To help our audience follow along with the agenda, I'll state each section aloud. We are streaming live on the Virtual Engagement Hub, which is accessible through the Virtual Engagement Hub link on the front page of the city website. We also have the option for the public to listen live by phone. For those joining us today, welcome. For today's meeting, we have the option for people to call in and comment live during the meeting. To call in and comment live, use the same number, 855-925-2801, meeting code 2689. Your phone will be muted and you'll hear the meeting live. At this point, the speakers will need to push *3 to enter the speaker queue. I'll now go through and introduce all of our staff members and our council members. We also have special guests from our Community Reparations Commission. Staff and guests and council, when I call your name, just give a quick hello. Councilwoman Sage Turner.
Hello.
Councilwoman Kim Roney.
Good afternoon.
Assistant City Manager Rachel Wood.
Good afternoon.
Director of Communication and Public Engagement, Dawa Hitch.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Director of the Office of Equity and Inclusion. I can never get that right. Brenda Mills, how are you?
Good afternoon.
City Attorney Brad Branham.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Communication Specialist Ricardo Tapia Bercerto.
Hi, everyone.
Okay, and Economic Development Specialist Rachel Taylor.
Good afternoon.
And as I stated before, we have special guests, the two chairs from the advisory board. I believe we have Dr. Dwight with us. I'm not sure that I saw Dewana yet. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
All righty, I'll move on to the agenda. I'll need a motion for two separate motions. If I can pull my agenda up. I'll entertain the motion for the March. I can't pull it up right now.
The March minutes for Equity and Engagement Committee. I'm happy to make that motion.
Okay, go for it.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, I'll do a roll call vote. Councilwoman Turner. I didn't hear you, but
Oh, sorry, aye.
okay. Councilwoman Roney.
Aye.
And myself, aye. The motion carries for the March 21st meeting. And I'll take another motion. I'll make a motion to approve the March 13th minutes. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, we'll move on to the first item on our agenda. We'll have a presentation on the Community Reparations Committee. It's actually the annual report. And I don't know if Brenda is going to lead us in, but we'll be hearing from Dr. Dwight.
I'll lead you in. I want to welcome Dr. Dwight Mullen and Miss Dewana Little. She popped up there just a few minutes after you called her name. They're going to be here to kind of go over their activities for the Community Reparations Commission for 2022. So without further ado, Dr. Dwight Mullen, if you will give Katie some directions whenever you're ready for the slides to be moved. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you. And I want to thank the staff for pulling the slide show together and so concisely putting what we've done for your benefit. At the end, there will be questions, a time for question and answers. So if you could wait till then, that would be great. First, the next slide, please. Our mission was handed to us by the city and by the county, in that we're empowered to make short, medium, and long-term recommendations that will make progress towards repairing the damage caused by public and private systemic racism. Task of the Reparations Commission is to issue a report in a timely manner for consideration by the city and other participating community groups for incorporation to respective short-term, long-term priorities and plans. This is pretty much following the resolutions as passed by the city and by the county, and it follows very succinctly a discussions we've had in the initial phases of the commission meeting. Next slide, please. The composition of the Community Reparations Commission, you're probably very familiar with, in that we have 15 representatives from legacy neighborhoods, including Asheville Housing Authority, Burton Street, East End, Valley Street, the Heart of Chestnut, Shiloh, South Side, as well as Stumptown. In addition, we have, and those nominees were taken straight from the community without being vetted by the city council. In addition to those 15, we have 10 representatives appointed by the city and by the county, and they in turn are appointed the impact focus areas of criminal justice, economic development, education, health and wellness, and housing. And in addition to those 10, there are 4 alternates. And I'm here to say to you that the alternates are taking their jobs as seriously as if they were full commission members, attending meetings, attending IFAs. Next slide, please. So far, our accomplishments are limited to the ones you see listed, in that that first bullet in terms of the members appointed by city council and by the Buncombe County commissioners, that's no small thing to put with 25 people at the table along with alternates. And honestly, you know, as chair, I was not expecting to be elected chair of the commission, and to have those community members sitting around the table to discuss the things that we have been discussing is in itself historic. It's a significant thing to go to a commission meeting if you've not already attended, to see how these neighborhoods are interacting, these individuals are participating. In August, the IFAs, the Impact Focus Area work groups were formed, and they've been meeting ever since, at least monthly. Some have been meeting bi-monthly, with community members who have particular interest in also joining them. And from the commission, another accomplishment was the recommendation for ongoing support. And it was passed June of 2022, and it taken to the city and by the county respectively. We'll get into that a little bit further later on in the presentation. And the second major recommendation coming out of the commission and forwarded to the city and county, the immediate recommendation to stop the harm, which was passed in December of 2022. Next slide, please. And the funding is where we're the continued support is coming from, in terms of the city has committed initial investment of $2.1 million fiscal year 22, and its fiscal year 23 budget includes an additional investment of $500,000. Considerations are currently underway with the city, the fiscal year 24 budget, to include another $500,000 annually with a 2% compounding interest, compounding increase to mirror the county's process. The county, on the other hand, has allocated $2 million for reparations in its fiscal year 23 budget. The Board of Commissioners voted to also add $500,000 to future reparations budget with an annual increase of 2%. And in both cases, the city and the county, publicly as well as personally, I was assured that the current membership is happy to have made these commitments, but there's no guarantee that future elected bodies can continue that relationship. And so if this is a snapshot of today as well as the near future, but not for perpetuity. The next slide, please. The budgetary impact of the recommendations, the immediate recommendation to stop the harm. The budgetary impact is determined as is anticipated by a comprehensive audit implemented through a third-party vendor. And as such, will be subject to the procurement process. We're in the midst of this now. The city and county dedicated reparations resources to be used to fund the audit. And we are in the process of selecting a third party. We are discussing it within ourselves as staff, as well as selected members of the commission before it goes back to the commission and continues with the procurement process. So we haven't selected an actual third party yet. Next slide, please. Some of our upcoming goals and planning for 2023. We've actually been in place now for a year. And to let you know, as chair, I'm privy to conversations with a number of the commission members. And I'm very proud to say to these folks that they are tired. They've been working hard. They're halfway through the process and are anxious to continue it to its conclusion. And in doing so, we're finding it necessary to reaffirm why we're here. We're even considering the possibility of a retreat to talk about the meaning of reparations, to assure as we go forward. We've adopted a new project timeline, and I think, speaking for myself, the major characteristic of the timeline that is on the table is that it's flexible. It's allowing us to consider a number of things because so much has come up before us that was unanticipated. So a strict guideline, which I'm about to give you, probably is more flexible than it sounds, in that I am looking for our final report to be to you in April of this time next year. To solidify the vetting recommendations for the third party and then develop ongoing list of frequently asked questions to refer to in 2023. Next slide, please. We're also looking to increase the feedback from those participating in the process. These surveys that are being conducted after each meeting are valuable ways of adjusting our direction and intensity and the composition of future meetings. We are intending to invite more local experts and speakers to partner with the commission meetings. Initially, our experts and speakers were national in scope, sometimes international in scope, academic in scope, and now we're looking at local folk contributing perspectives as well as the results of ongoing participation in their various IFA areas. We're developing a detailed slate of recommendations for each impact area focus group. How detailed depends on each of the focus areas. And then they will be brought before the full commission, who will then recommend their references to the city and to the county. And we are participating in the selection, general oversight of the audit in response to immediate stop the harm recommendation. The next slide, please. Oh, we're at the end already. Questions? Questions, John?
You can go ahead, Ms. Kim.
Thank you for the update on what the work has looked like and your points about reaffirming the why the historic gathering is happening. Because I was in the room when Priscilla gave the presentation about the mapping that she and her group have done around the impact of urban renewal and redlining in what was her neighborhood, I've looked at it online before. I know many people that have, but being in the room as it was being reviewed together was a much different experience to gauge just the tone and the timbre of how people were reacting and responding. Has there been any conversation about whether or not that kind of work would be replicated for other neighborhoods, if there's an interest?
It's funny, I just concluded, I just had a short meeting with maybe Duana, vice chair of the commission, may want to speak to this. But the different IFAs are coming at their topics in very unique ways. And being in the room gives both benefit as well as challenges, particularly in smaller settings than the commission meetings. But either way we go, I think that the enrichment of our outcomes is dependent on exactly that, being personally in the room with each other to hear and to see each other's responses. Duana, please feel free to join in. Leave me out here hanging now.
We actually are looking at expanding it. I know it was mentioned at the last commission meeting as well, and we are looking at what that would look like to expand it to the other neighborhoods, because it was really specific to the Southside community, and what it would take to do that. And so I know that is a topic. What that's going to look like over this next year, I'm not sure, but it is something that is people are interested in seeing for the fullness of the Black legacy neighborhoods.
I think one of the big takeaways that I was realizing is that the city may have one parcel of land. It was a joining together of multiple parcels that had been impacted. So kind of being able to zoom in, allowed to be able to zoom out, was really helpful. Additionally, I was able to attend one of the meetings that was had in community around the focus area for health. And it was very well attended. The room was full of people. And I was wondering, do you have a picture of like how the focus area meetings are being attended? Is it proving to be effective to be in community? How do you gauge what's working?
So the focus areas, all of the focus groups are now shifting to that model that the health group did, to be more engaged in community. In reference to our focus areas, certain focus areas have more attendance based on interest. As far as education has a lot of people that attend that group. Housing has several people that attend that group, and economic development definitely has a number of people. And so I guess it depends on the community interest as to where the biggest issue is. And we know that education is a major area of interest. And so we are, like, for the criminal justice IFA, I know that we are about to do our community engagement event as well. And so we want to be able to be more accessible and more in community. And so all of the IFAs are working on getting to that place where we're all doing those type of events throughout the community.
Let me piggyback on that, is that it, I think, really highlights the need for community education about reparations and the process. We can't get everyone in those rooms. And so if we could approach a broader way of educating the community about the meaning of reparations and the intent and purpose of the different IFAs, that would be great. That would be great.
Thank you.
Anything from you, Sage?
Not at this time, no.
I know we had entertained the idea of maybe having a representative from each IFA come to this body and do a high-level review of what they are communicating to the commission or communicating to the community. I still look forward to that coming to reality. And I would like to say thank you all for all your work, and let the commissioners know that their hard work and dedication and stick-to-itness is very much appreciated. I look forward to you all coming back very soon.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I will.
All right, Brenda, you can take it to the next agenda item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we're going to give you a little bit of update. This month in particular, Katie, you can go to the next slide. This month in particular, your meeting is just prior to the Community Reparations Commission meeting. We changed the date because there was an event at the Civic Center this week. So we will be meeting on Monday. So this is what we see as the future. And then I'll come back next month in May with any updates from that. So they're going to be going through several updates, looking to vote on a few things. And one of the things that we're beginning to do, and we started in January, is hearing from our impact focused areas. So last month, I'm going to get this wrong, it was education and health and wellness. This month, Monday, we're going to hear from the housing, criminal justice, and economic development impact focus areas. The members will get an update on where we are with the audit scope of work, and we'll get a presentation. We're really excited about this, from the County Justice Services Director regarding criminal justice efforts and supporting the work of the Criminal Justice IFA. Next slide. So like I said, we get really excited because we get to hear about the ongoing work. Now, this is not the recommendation phase of their update. So generally, they're just talking to us about the kind of work they're doing. They're taking Q&A from the other members of the impact focus areas and in the greater community reparations group. And so it's been great. There will be a slide deck if you check on their webpage on the Community Reparations Commission, like with all the other boards and commissions, you'll see those updates in slide deck. I think moving forward, what we could tend to do is that once we hear an update from them, we could bring them on over to the following month's meeting and have a few representatives of those folks come and give you an update of what they're working on so that they can hear some feedback from you and you can kind of hear from them about the work they're doing. This has not been easy work. It is difficult when you are dealing with a whole community that has a lot of great expectations, but these people have stayed the course. And a lot of the energy of this commission comes out of those impact focus areas. So the members will hear the next steps about the audit scope of work recommendation. We actually posted it, I believe it was yesterday. And you have some information that'll be shared with you from Katie Noun in your packet around, we posted it on the county website. It was posted on the city website this morning. We posted it on the interactive purchasing system for the state. So statewide will see it. And then we had some recommendations from 3 or 4, maybe 5 specific businesses that might do this type of audit work. And we reached out to them directly. So we'll be talking to the committee about that. And then we're really excited. Tiffany Anasio is the impact focus area expert for criminal justice, working with Salam and Naya Merritt with criminal justice. And they have really teamed up and they've had Terry Bellamy join them in that office with the Safety and Justice Grant. So we're going to hear a lot of work around what they've been doing in terms of criminal justice and supporting that work. Next slide. So to kind of give you an idea about the timeline around this audit, we're in the phase of March and April where we have gotten it posted on date. We're going to take the spring and the summer to really do the evaluation process. I want to remind you that we had 4 members of the Community Reparations Commission that helped us. They will also be a part of that. We're going to have a pre-submittal meeting, time for Q&A, responding to questions, and then we're going to evaluate the proposals. They will help us with that and then make the final selection and present that to the Community Reparations Commission. We're looking around the timeline of late June, early July. And then the fall, all of this depends on where the vendor says they have the capacity, how long it would take them to do this audit. We're preparing stuff even as we speak within our internal places. And then we'll do an ongoing update to the Community Reparations Commission and the impact focus area groups on the work of this audit. Next slide. So like I said, we're going to get some great presentations from housing, criminal justice, and economic development. We'll give an update on the audit scope of work. We're really excited about that. That was a big team effort. With the city, the county, and the 4 representatives from the Community Reparations Commission, and then a presentation from the County Justice Services Director. And I believe the next slide is questions.
Any questions from the committee?
This is Kim. I did see Dr. Mullen's presentation outlined that we have a budget proposal that's come through the budget work sessions of council for compounding interest or compounding account for reparations that would include a 2% increase, like matching what the county's been doing. Since that's new to our budget process this year, will that also be presented to the commission on Monday? Are they aware of that?
No, that's part of the city's FY24 budget. Once we've told them that we will do that consideration, but once it's passed, we'll go and we'll talk with them about it. Yes. That's not on the slate for this agenda, maybe for May.
Okay. I guess I was just curious because this would be definitely because it's new. It's like the initial talks. It seems like waiting until after the budget would miss an opportunity to provide input during the public input process. Will the May meeting be after our public engagement for the budget this year?
I don't think so. But, you know, we can let them know. That's not a problem to email the commission about that. And I do know that we've been pretty active in asking people to participate in the budget process. So we just remind them to do that.
Appreciate that, Brenda. Thank you.
Rachel.
Rachel?
I think just looking at the dates, Brenda, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think reparations meets on the 15th of May. And then I'd need to confirm this with Taylor, but I believe the state mandated public hearing is on May 23rd.
Mm-hmm.
And so there would be an opportunity for us to present, as Brenda was saying, to the Reparations Commission after the manager's recommended budget presentation on May 9th. And before that, required public hearing on May 23rd.
And what we could do, we can add some information at the meeting, this meeting, and then they'll have that date for giving feedback. You know, they already have the allocation. We're just looking at the compounding interest. That's what we're looking at. We're not looking at the allocation, but the compounding interest. So
Right. So I would certainly, of course, lean on the leadership of the CRC to make the decision on that agenda item. It would be curious to me if we would be making a change to the funding amount and not bring it to the commission to let them know. But thank you for letting me know the timeline.
all right, you're welcome, ma'am.
All right, thank you for being here, Brenda. Thank you for all you do. Move to the next item on our agenda if we're clear, if everybody's said what they want to say. All right, we'll move to the biannual report on analytics, language, and accessibility. Dala?
Good afternoon, committee members. I'm Dala Hitch, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Communication and Public Engagement Director for the city. And here in the middle of this presentation, I'll be very pleased to introduce you to one of our team members who's done a lot of the work that is contained within this presentation. So we will get started. You want to move to the next slide, Katie? All right, so in today's presentation, we're going to be going over the creation of a language accessibility plan. Wanted to make sure the committee knew that that is being developed, and the creation of this plan will allow for there to be more organizational and departmental work plan information as we look at those areas in the coming years. Language accessibility is one component of the ARPA, Inclusive and Accessible Government Project, which we have given presentations about here in the last few months. And that project seeks to improve neighborhood resilience by addressing barriers to communication and engagement. And then the last piece is going to be a summary of the biannual website audit that our department does, and that is in support of continuous improvement in information and accessibility, all as it relates to the website. Next slide. All right, so just to recap on that ARPA project, it's got 4 components. We presented on 2 of them in February. Today we'll be talking about the language accessibility component, and we'll be back to you for an update on the upfit of community spaces component of the project in June. And just as a reminder, that total project budget is about a little over $514,000. 140,000 of that is going direct to the community, and then indirect to the community is in the ballpark of $374,000. Next slide. So back to that language accessibility plan. So this project, this component of the ARPA project, is going to create a plan that can be used in the development of organizational and departmental work plan priorities and budget requests. So it's something that will be able to be reviewed on an annual basis as departments and the organization determine what our priorities are as that relates to the budget process and what we have funding for. Next slide. All right, so we started off with an environmental scan. We wanted first to start with understanding, and staff has worked throughout the organization to make sure that we have an understanding of what the language accessibility tools are that all departments are using. So what we have right now, we've got website translation, we have over the phone interpretation, we have document translation, and online and on-site interpretation. And then wanted to also let the committee know that this work has been informed by the Federal Limited English Proficiency website, which is rich in resources and has given us some insights into laws and regulations, best practices, and has also given us some templates for language access planning. Next slide. All right, so as I mentioned earlier, we started internally. We really wanted to make sure that we heard from different departments so we had a good understanding of opportunities that exist or challenges that are being experienced. We also collected ideas and suggestions, and we also promoted the use of current services. So there are about 18 department meetings that Ricardo Serto, who will be talking with you here in just a second, he went and visited. We did a lot of listening, and through that, we've been able to do a lot of learning. Next slide. All right, so I'm going to turn it over now to Ricardo, and he's going to share with you what we heard in those departmental listening sessions.
Muchísimas gracias, and thank you very much for this opportunity. In the meetings that we received, we identified many of the staff identified as a necessity the importance of recruit and incentivize having a multilingual staff to better assist our community. We would like to work to have a voluntary directory of staff proficient in different language, because we already have some internal capacities, but we really don't know that much about it. We are discussing having maybe a bonus to multilingual staff willing to assist with translation, because this can be a complicated work that could be an addition to current responsibilities. We talk about having a department-specific plain language and translating frequent asked question handouts with a QR code effect, so we can better explain to the population in general, to the community, what the city does in English or in any other language. We also, and that was really inspiring for us, we see a lot of interest from many city staff to have language courses for employees who want to take classes at varying levels in Spanish, in American Sign Language, or different languages to continue improving their formation and to better assist the community. We also discuss about the importance of having more inclusive spaces with multilingual signs and document or city facilities to better facilitate that when someone walks in can navigate better. And finally, the importance of language accessibility accommodations for community engagement efforts, such as having an interpreter or signage during meetings. And so we are already doing some efforts, but we could be doing some more.
Thank you so much for that, Ricardo. Katie, if we can move to the next slide. I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about some of the progress that has been made already. So we got input on a number of things that we could do. We know we want to take that input. It's going to be put into a plan that all departments can reference as priorities are established each year. And in the interim, we've also done these things. So we've now got a city council agenda and link to that city council agenda in Spanish. So we've operationalized that. It's a small and important step. We've seen a significant increase in the use of translation requests, which is very exciting for us. We're really happy to see that folks are understanding that these resources are available and they are tapping into them. So just from February to April, we had 23 internal Spanish requests, and that resulted in about 32 hours of work. We've also been able to send out social media messaging in Spanish. We are currently evaluating training opportunities, what the programs could be and the costs could be, again, so all of our departments have good information to make decisions off of moving forward. This one, the internal outreach planning for available tools and standard operating procedures. If you recall from the last slide, there was a piece that was in green, and that was something that we heard from our colleagues, and they wanted for there to be interpreters and multilingual signs at community meetings. And we have those. We have a process in place. And what we learned is we need to do a better job of making sure all of our colleagues across the organization know that those are available. So we know we've got some work to do in that area with existing standard operating procedures. And then finally, we've got the Google Translate, the select language dropdown is now available on all pages of the website instead of just the front page and some of our leading interior pages. Next slide. All right, I'm going to move now into the website audit. I wanted to take just a minute to share that the vision behind our current website is that it is a service-focused website, and that is that it was designed with the user in mind as opposed to what our hierarchical structure looks like within the organization. So there's a lot of intention behind user preferences. And we know that most people come to our website to accomplish a task or to engage around something that's impacting their life. And so again, the website is structured to reflect that. I just wanted to point or to draw to everyone's attention these areas here at the top, because it's how we structured our website audit and the results that you're getting ready to hear. Next slide. All right, so if we're beginning with the end in mind, what we want is we want consistently accurate information, and we want a website that's accessible to all people. Next slide. And here is what our methodology and our findings were for this last audit that we did. So 120 pages were randomly selected. Again, based on the structure of the website, we pulled pages from each of the areas you see there. Department pages, services pages, government pages, project pages. And then we did a test for consistency, for consistently accurate information. And that was a look at the date of the last review of each of the pages. We've got a lot of pages on our website, and so finding some way to be able to manage if it's got accurate information took some time and energy. Our second test, the test for accessibility to all people, the test we used there was style guide compliance. And here to the right, there's a chart, and you can see the results from this particular audit. First, we looked at the percent of audit pages which had been reviewed in the past 60 days. And here, project pages were the pages that had been reviewed most frequently, then department pages, and then service pages. So we know we've got some work to do there in making sure that we are reaching out to the content editors in those certain areas and making sure that they are regularly reviewing the page to make sure that the information is accurate. The second test, the test for accessibility, 92% of the sample pages were in style guide compliance. So one little note before I move on to that, and that is, if just because a page had not been reviewed, that does not mean, going back to this test for accuracy, that doesn't mean that there is inaccurate information. It just means it failed our audit test and our best guess at whether or not we've got accurate information across the board.
Dawa, should we hold questions for the end or if they pop up?
Dawa, I think you're muted.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. I think I've only got like 20 seconds more. That would be great. And then I can turn my timer off and make sure I'm not going over time. I know y'all have a busy schedule today. All right, so next slide. All right, so the progress on that, all right, we want to take those audit findings and make sure that we're continually improving the website. And what we have done since we last presented on this is we've created a new web editor dashboard so that web editors can see much more easily when their pages have not been reviewed. And again, that's how we know if we've got our best guess at it, making sure that we've got accurate information across the website. So these are things that only web editors will see. But it does list all the pages that they're responsible for in one spot, and we hope that that will improve the accuracy. Next slide. All right, so our key takeaways, the language accessibility plan is coming. It will be used to inform priorities on an annual basis, including budget requests. That plan is a component of our ARPA, Inclusive and Accessible Government Project. And you've also seen the website audit findings. And that effort is aimed to make sure we're continually improving information and accuracy on the website. And next slide, that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, so can we go back 2 slides or 3, wherever that one was? Okay, right here. 92% of sample pages are in style guide compliance. Do you have, is the other 8% falling into one bucket? Is it like really part of one area, or is it scattered? Like, that's pretty good. looks like it's good at least.
It is, and again, it's a sample, and we know that there's always room for improvement. So I would say, if I recall correctly, when we're looking at the style guide, we're looking at our subheadings used, things that make it easier for machine readers, for example, to be able to read web pages. And I may have to get back with you all on if there were any. What I recall is that it was a little scattered all over the place, that there wasn't one huge area where we knew we needed to immediately focus attention, but rather that continuous training of our content editors and why the style guide is so important.
And then that, because I've served with folks in the blind community here in Asheville, it seemed like the bucket that we kept running into when working alongside each other was PDFs. Because the PDF, if it's not got a searchable element to it, then you'll have whole pages that look blank to low and no vision readers. So I think that's something I was just specifically looking for. And then also the other thing that has come up often when engaging with the public is when our documents aren't available in advance. It makes it hard to do any additional translation, verification of accuracy, or work to make sure that they work for low and no vision readers in advance. So I think that's part of that, like 72-hour document availability. But ultimately, I pulled up the city website as you were walking us through this. And I'll note that it's very small in the top left-hand corner, underneath the emblem that I can see visually as the city of Asheville, there is a pull down option. And it looks like not only does that change the front facing page, but also if I go to, for example, Servicios and do the pull down menu for services, each one of those is also translated as well. So it looks really great. When would we expect to see maybe an update on how it's working, like the outcomes?
I would expect that in our next all right, so our findings inform short-term kind of department level priorities that we're looking at a quarterly basis. So the next time we're in April, the next time I think it's August that the audit is done, we'll be sure to include a section about the improvements that were made based off this one. And then we'll roll into what the current state is. And then I guess that will be the rhythm. That 6-month rhythm will be able to report back on what we've been able to improve on the findings from the 6 months before, unless the committee would like an update sooner.
I trust you on that. I think it's going to take time. This was a big, humongous chunk of the work, a big, huge step forward. And I also wanted to note that when I first saw on the agenda, it said that the agenda was in Spanish, but it said that part in English. I noticed that that's been updated to now it says the agenda, but it says it in Spanish, in Espanol. So those kinds of steps are ones I'm really excited to see happening, the curiosity, the amount of possibility that you and your team are bringing to the table. And so thank you so much.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. There you go, Ricardo. Got 2 big thumbs up.
All right. Thank you, Dola and Ricardo. We'll move to strategic partnership grant funding recommendations, and I'll kick it to Rachel Taylor.
Great, thank you. And can share my screen real quick. Oh, Katie, it looks like, okay. Sweet, thanks. All right, so I'm here today to present the funding recommendations for the Strategic Partnership Grant Program. Next slide. So today we will go over a couple of updates and then discuss the recommendations. So the scope for this year's grant program maintained the defined scope that was set by the pilot in 2022. And that is to focus on closing the opportunity gap for low to moderate income students in Asheville. So the pilot for the revised scope was launched in 2022. Staff incorporated lessons learned from the pilot for this year's grant program and will continue to refine the program through additional research and stakeholder engagement. This latest round of grant applications were received from February 22nd until March 31st, and we received 23 applications. The presentations from applicant agencies were heard on April 13th, followed by finalized funding recommendations from the evaluation panel. So today we're asking this committee to review the recommendations from the evaluation panel and make final recommendations to City Council for City Council consideration on April 25th. Staff also recommended setting aside $25,000 to fund technical assistance for grant recipients. Next slide. So for this year, as I mentioned, the scope remained consistent as the pilot grant program. We also streamlined communications and administrative requirements by updating the application process. So again, the goal for that was to really help to shorten that agreement development process and share information about requirements. We also increased the award minimum to $35,000 per program or proposal. And then the evaluation panel provided award recommendations based on fully funding requests. So here's a brief snapshot of the grant program balance. So in June 2022, the program started with just over $700,000. The total pilot award was $375,500. So then the grant program balance as of August, which is and then what we're currently working with right now is $335,500. And then we anticipate a budget allocation in the next fiscal year of $242,000. So our projected program balance for the coming fiscal year, so as of July 1, 2023, will be $577,000. So that's kind of what we're working with. Next slide. We had 8 evaluation panel members. We really wanted to get a good cross-section of subject matter experts. So we had 4 evaluators from the community and 4 evaluators from city staff. And of the city staff members, we really tried to pull from the staff that had experience with the opportunity gap, budget and grants, and equity considerations. And then from the community members, we really focused on education and programming for youth. And so hoping to get that kind of direct expertise. Next slide. So in this latest round in 2023, we received 23 applications and the funding request was just under 1.7 million. The total recommended award for this funding round is $356,209. And then just to give an example of the comparison, so for 2022, we received 31 applications. We received 1.9 million in funding requests, and the initial recommended amount for the pilot was 336,000. So you can kind of see that lined up. We received 2 multi-year requests, so that's why this table is kind of spread out across 2023 and 2024 as well. Next slide. So the evaluation panel recommendations, we received 23 applications, and these applications were scored based on each program's demonstrated ability to address the opportunity gap for school-age youth, their ability to attract and measure results, the available resources and capacity to carry out the project, and a workable budget to support the program. The evaluation panel provided funding recommendations based on the fully funding the request. The program, as I mentioned, received 2 requests for multi-year funding over 2 years, and the funding breakdown, again, was indicated across the 2 fiscal years. And so just as a note, as we get into these recommendations, we had 27 questions on the evaluation scoring spreadsheet. The total highest combined score possible was 81. 77.2 was the highest score from an individual applicant. And then you'll see the percentages of the scores in the next slide. And just as a note, some applications had a higher average score The evaluation panel indicated that for some applications, they would have recommended partial funding if that had been directed to them. And then they also noted that while the evaluation scores are helpful, the scores provided a kind of imperfect picture of their complete evaluation. Next slide. Okay, so the evaluation panel recommended the following organizations at their fully funded amounts. So again, just tried to separate the kind of the multi-year requests over year 1 and year 2. And then I can go into like a deeper breakdown if we want to look at that. Okay.
Yeah, go for it. Kim.
I have a number of questions. I wasn't sure if you were waiting to get to the end of the presentation or if this is a good chance to ask questions about this slide.
How about this? Because I know there are a lot of questions. I'm going to skip forward a little bit real quick to talk about our technical assistance funding recommendations, and then maybe we can jump back into the grant recommendations. Okay. Sorry, next slide. So our additional funding recommendation is that staff recommends setting aside $25,000 to fund technical assistance for grant recipients. The one example provider is WNC Nonprofit Pathways. They provide local and regional technical assistance to nonprofits and offer a range of services like a certificate program, which has many different available courses, workshops, webinars, and also organizational assessments and coaching. So they would be, an organization like that would be able to provide really specific and detailed technical assistance, no matter where the organization is at in its growth. So staff recommends supporting organizations with technical assistance, and that is to maximize the impact and improve overall management of the grant program through timely grant disbursement, performance and impact, and using grant funds fully. Next slide. So just to break down those 3 categories a little bit more, and these are taken from things that we recognize through the pilot grant administration. So improving timeliness and of award disbursement. Technical assistance would help to build capacity to quickly provide required documents. So one example is that the certificate of insurance was one of the lengthier documents that it took across all organizations to finalize that agreement, which is kind of the first major step in being able to eventually disperse payment. And then also getting assistance to build capacity to consistently provide accurate and timely invoices with the supporting documentation. The supporting documents can vary based on the agreement, but sort of the next step is that we are not able to process an invoice until we have a full and complete correct invoice. So we want to be able to provide organizations with some support in that area. The second area is to better understand and measure performance and impact. So really getting some assistance to strengthen ability of organizations to gather outcome data, and then to adjust programming based on performance evaluation. Also working to strengthen the ability to communicate outcome improvements year over year, and then building the capacity to conduct financial reviews and/or program reviews. And then in the last category, I want to ensure that grant awards are used fully year over year. And so we want to increase the percentage of grants that are awarded and fully used during the grant period. And with that, I will pause and we can go forward or go back, take questions.
Committee.
Well, I'll start with this. I have a list of 5 things, but I wanted to point out that on this slide, it says ensure that grant awards are used fully year after year. And I was reviewing the pilot that we did and seeing who has already fulfilled the drawdown for funds and who's on track to fulfill that drawdown. That kind of is a way to see if our partnership is effective, if the funding is getting out into the community through programming to meet the needs of our students, and specifically to address the opportunity gap, right? So it's surprising to me a little that we don't see that as maybe a point or a marker of like, are we going to maintain the partnerships that we found to be effective? But while I was holding that question in mind, I just have to acknowledge, I think we all know this, that there's scarcity in this too. I wish we had more funding to allocate. I really wish we had the $419,000 in asset forfeiture funds to invest in youth impacted by the root causes of violence in our community, in their schools, in their neighborhoods. I just finished the Do the Right Thing analysis with the youth that participated in the writing competition. And it matched what a lot of youth all over our country are saying is they want to sit at the table around decisions. So maybe in the future we could find a way to get a cohort or our Kayla students or some way to bring youth to the table around this. But I do want to say thank you for expanding the evaluation seats outside of the city of Asheville. Last year, I think we had 1 for the pilot program. This year, it's like 50% at 4. So what would it look like if instead of the either or of take the staff recommendation or don't take the staff recommendation, can we bring a third thing to the table? And what I saw in the Strategic Partnership Grant Evaluation Scores document, there was a list of, or a column of notes. And in that notes, it says, yes, if partial. And I wondered, because we asked the evaluation committee to consider full funding, which I originally, maybe a few years ago, thought that's the answer, right? If we're going to partner, we need to fully partner and get behind people. What I'm learning is that when we partially fund an organization, it does create a gap, but it also creates a lever where that organization can say, hey, the city of Asheville trusts us in this work. They're beside us part of the way. We need y'all to come the rest of the way. It is an opportunity to leverage partnership that we don't have in this recommendation, but we might. So if there was a third option, which is to do maybe a combination of full and partial funding, or to look at the remaining funds and go ahead and get behind partially funding some of these, it looks like there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 that we could potentially partially fund. I know that depletes our ability to make additional funding opportunities next year, but the urgency of what's happening with our kids right now is so great, and it's not new. So I guess I'm just curious if this committee would be willing to do kind of a yes and, that we do need to get behind the recommendation, the full funding, but also look for a way to get behind the partial funding is sort of what appeared to me to be like a second recommendation.
Yeah, I can vibe with that. But first, before we go into the conversation about fully and or partial or both, I wanted to get information from staff pertaining to the remaining balance that we have for the pilot. I know that we made a recommendation maybe 2 months ago that if an agency was unable to execute their partnership agreement after 60 days, then we would then think about redispersing those funds. And I know it's kind of hard to determine where organizations are in the process. I don't know whether some have invoiced and they just have to do some corrections with their invoice, or if some organizations are not fully prepared and they have not even completed the partnership agreement. I just wanted to know if we can get some information from staff pertaining the remaining balance so we can decide if partial is what the committee likes, if what pool we have to play with.
Definitely, I can share that, and I put together a spreadsheet. You guys need to share that? Thanks. Thank you, Katie. I will try to make this a little bit bigger. Can everyone see that a little bit more? I can try to make it a little bit bigger. Okay, so yes, we pulled together, these are the grantees from the pilot program. And this initial part of the spreadsheet is the amount that they were awarded, so their full contract amount, and that you see that reflected in the total there. This is the amount of contract actuals, and that reflects we've gotten some invoices recently, so whether the check has actually been cut or not, those are reflected here. So we've spent basically about 57% of the initial grant. And then so we have about 43% remaining. Now the question around what has been spent, what has not been spent. We've got two grantees that have fully spent their awards, and two reasons one reason for that is that Yamoja here with 20,000. They had a one-time payment. And then YTL training programs had 3 payments scheduled a little earlier in the process. So while they received a couple different payments and sent us a couple different invoices, those all 3 happened before today. So they are on track and they've fully spent their grants. And I also want to highlight 3 organizations that have some unspent funds that are currently appear to be on track to spend down their remaining funds. And so Chosen Pods, who is using the Carolina Rescue Mission as their fiscal agent, they are on track to spend their remaining funds. Read to Succeed and Serve to Lead are on track. Again, through different changes in programming throughout the year, their agreement allows for them. And so they may have spent a little bit less in one month or quarter than in another one. Another bit of context is that we worked with the organizations to develop an invoicing schedule that suited their needs. So that's why you're seeing some different spending rates across the different organizations. So some had one payment and some have many. And so then our final category, which is I think the one to note here, is organizations that have either not invoiced or have some funds that are not likely to be invoiced. And so these top 2 organizations have not, Aspire has not submitted any invoices, and then with one youth at a time, we have not been able to finalize an agreement. We heard from one program that they had requested grant funds for a pilot, and so that these unspent funds are just the result of having a pilot program and making adjustments as necessary. They did not apply this year, but would be interested in applying in another year. So that total, again, these are estimates. So, the spending might pick up in this group, and that would leave us with a little bit less, or the spending might slow down in this group, and we might have a little bit more. But as of right now, we've got about 93,000 that we could expect to see go back into the grant balance.
Okay, and kind of following up with this information, I saw that 2 organizations did request a breakdown for multi-year funding, but some organizations did not. They requested partial, but they didn't give the breakdown. And I'm just wondering if we would have different outcomes on the recommendation if they were able to break down per year, what they request. So I don't know if anybody else from the committee had any insights on that, or because I just wanted to know if we would have come up with a different recommendation from staff if each organization had a year-by-year breakdown.
Yeah, I was also curious, what does it look like to have we've raised the floor saying we need to see a funding of a specific amount, but we haven't really talked about a ceiling. And I don't understand maybe what the percentage of the budgets are of these organizations. Like, is it possible that what we're seeding through a partial fund could be a game changer, or is it just a tiny % of an overall budget? So it sounds like what you're asking is, should we look at this in reevaluating the question we asked of the committee, which is kind of like where I'm at too. Seeing this yes if partial side by side gives me a different picture of what's possible if we put a third thing on the table.
So Councilmember Smith, if I could really quickly, in anticipation of there potentially being some questions around partial funding, and knowing that the committee received the spreadsheet yesterday that did indicate where the evaluation committee had at least had some conversations around agencies that might be considered or recommended if partial funding was a consideration brought forward by the Equity and Engagement Committee today. Rachel has prepared a spreadsheet that essentially has kind of the running total. So she's got what the evaluation committee's full recommendation is, that 356,209. And then she sorted it where you can see the agencies that the evaluation committee said they might consider for partial funding if that was something that was a consideration that this committee wanted to bring forward. And so Rachel's done some quick formatting on here. And if there was a consideration of this committee, she can simply type in the dollar amount that the Equity and Engagement Committee members might recommend for partial or full funding from other agencies to draw down from that highlighted 221, 291, which would be the sum of what we currently are projecting to have available at the start of fiscal year 24, minus that 356,209 that the evaluation committee recommended. So we can essentially kind of balance as you are making recommendations if there are alternate recommendations from this committee over and above the full funding recommendations from the evaluation committee.
I guess the thing that's still outstanding for me is the effectiveness of the pilot. Like, it's not clear to me why the Christine Avery Learning Center, which is doing important work in our community, hasn't invoiced us. But that information would help me understand what was the barriers so we know how to be a better partner. Also, because YTL was effective in drawing down 100%, that's a factor for me.
So a couple of notes, and Rachel, I'll let you chime in just a second. But one is, of course, from an administrative perspective and getting the funds spent perspective, having one drawdown, of course, is easier. But then from a measuring impact and audit perspective, definitely not a best practice. So there's always going to be that balancing act there. And then we still have active agreements with the agencies for the pilot. So the pilot is still very much underway. And so unfortunately, we don't have the full results of the pilot. Rachel Taylor has done a great job documenting the information as it comes in, but because we still have active agreements and active programming underway, we can't say that we have completed programming where we have full results and full measurable impacts. And so we're kind of midway. Really the intent behind having the selection process now is so that agencies can plan for the upcoming school year, as well as for agencies that provide summer programming to give them a little more predictability in the funding that would be available through this grant program.
Does doing partial funding of the second tier of the recommendation that we saw on the previous slide mean that there would be a deferred or a delayed allocation? Like, would it be this budget cycle or would it be in the next year's budget cycle if that budget passes?
The impacts would primarily be to next budget cycle. So if we were to increase the amount of funding that was allocated to agencies this year, that would just obviously decrease what would be available to pool to whatever additional general fund allocation is approved as a part of the FY 24-25 budget, which those funds would be available July 1, 2024.
Right. So not wanting to pit organizations that are doing this important work against each other. I just think that's another part of the story is like we might be talking about theoretically funding partial grants for next year, which doesn't help people do the programming for this summer. Is that correct?
I believe that Rachel Hoppen, if I'm getting my timeline wrong, I think that we would be able to develop the agreements, and then we would have it so that the programming would start in the next fiscal year. So that would be July 1.
We could structure it that way, or it would just be structuring the agreement so that the agencies acknowledge that they would not be able to draw down funds until July 1. So programming could start, but they just wouldn't have city funding available until
2023, not 2024.
I'm sorry, I thought you were asking about for next year.
That's where I'm trying to get some clarity. If we are we signing up or considering partial funding for organizations that would start July 1, 2023, as in a couple months from now? Or are we talking about there would be a delay?
So the recommendations from the evaluation committee and the 577, 500, I guess let me back up. The available funds as of now, Rachel, are the 335, 500, I believe, if memory serves me correctly.
Yes, that's correct.
So we could essentially make funds available to agencies now based on the evaluation committee recommendations, because no agency is going to fully draw down those funds between now and July 1. If we were going to fully fund up to the 577, 500, that would be contingent on funding being available July 1, 2023, for the start of fiscal year 2024. Am I answering your question? And so then if we fully exhausted all of the 577,000, then any funding that we considered for the start of fiscal year 2025, which would be July 1, 2024, we would have to wait until that fiscal year started to actually make funds available for future grant considerations.
I got it. But I'm tracking on a whole different level. I'm thinking that we make the recommendations today considering full funding, but we know we have a pot of at least $90,000 that is kind of up in the air right now. We do have a recommendation in place around when the money should be spent. So maybe we can come back at a later date with partial considerations using the funds that are remaining from the pilot.
So you're recommending just using if that $93,000 ends up truly being available after the agreements currently end, then potentially making a decision based on that $93,000. Okay.
Yeah, and that's just my thought on how we make the funds available right now and not exhaust the 221. And then I can just, I assume that even in that conversation, considering the outstanding invoices, I'm thinking that some of the people who reapplied this time and agreed to partial payment, then there can be some agreement made then about their capacity to spend down or their capacity to qualify for new funding, if that makes sense.
So why not allocate the remaining available, I'm just going to pick a number out of the hat, 30% of the requested amount until it depletes itself for partial funding for beyond row 11? What would be our hope in retaining $200,000?
So because we're going to be here next year and we don't want to start at a zero balance because we know that programming has to be funded ahead of the summer year. So if we spend down too much, then we're going to start at a floor. I mean, we'll be back here doing the same thing, having a number of applications and not enough funds to distribute. So maybe it's a blend of both. Maybe we can have a partial percentage of the 221 along with another the 93 remaining if it is available. I'm a little curious. There's one thing that's still lingering. There was another slide that shows that these requests, the 6 that were suggested by the Committee for Full Funding, is already split up in 2 years, right?
Yes. So the ones.
So we're already pre-allocating like phased funding for some of them.
Yes, there are two recommendations. There were two agencies that applied for multi-year funding, and those were both recommended. And in the evaluation scores, those are divided up between two, year one and year two. So I can pull that up really quick, and I apologize for hopping between so many different spreadsheets. But so, for example, Open Doors Asheville requested $68,000 in year one, and then $58,000 in year two, and then the Arc of Buncombe County requested $25,000 in year one, and then $25,000 in year two.
So that kind of leaves me at a place of like, why not fully fund their fiscal year 23 request and not make the decision today on requesting the 24? That gives us more wiggle room for partial funding.
My one offer is that it was one application, and this is obviously the funding recommendation is up to this committee, but these two organizations that offered that applied based on a multi-year request were in one kind of package as an application.
Sure.
So
it does end up making it a partial funding, not a full funding, but it is a full fund of their fiscal year request.
Mm-hmm.
So what we have is we have a lot of organizations that are going to get no funding and some that are going to get 2 years of funding. If this is truly our goal, then the recommendation committee, just based on the scoring, we're not going like straight down the list. We're already making some differences in the scoring rubric. Does this committee feel okay with stepping outside the recommendation of that part? Or
I want to hear from Sage. And Sage, do you have any direction here? Or
I mean, I was kind of with you, Shanika. I understand where Kim is coming from, but I guess I'm not sure. I mean, it's a little odd to have, some people getting 9 and others getting 2 years. Shanika, I'm trying to figure out, and maybe I just haven't been a part of it long enough to know what you meant by if we spend it all down now, we won't have anything to start with next summer and so on. I mean, I know as long as I've been involved with council, this thing has kind of jumped around. So it's never been clean cut for me how we're funding this. The first year we withheld everything that I was involved. The second year we doubled down. This is my third year. Now we're changed again. So I'm losing kind of sense of what's supposed to be happening in all fairness. But I mean, if we have the funds, we can help. I would think we would do that rather than leave so many zeros on the table.
Yeah, I guess that's what I was trying to say was if we're already funding some organizations for 2 years, then we're already leaving us closer to zero anyway. Why not go ahead and allocate the 221 with some of the second tier recommendations from our committee?
And if there is like this baseline, we don't want to go below, we want to have some reserve. I get that. Maybe zeroing out isn't quite the right term, but it does seem that we could spend more unless there's just something I'm not understanding about the next cycle. And again, my experience with this is that it's been different every single year.
Well, let me get clarity from Rachel Wood. If we spend the full 577.5, then this time next year, what dollar amount will we be working with?
We would be working with a projected $242,000 that would be available on July 1.
And that's why I said we'll be starting at zero, guys, because we won't have anything to disperse. Well, we can make the recommendations, but it won't be available for invoicing until after July.
Is that what, in my first year of doing this, is that why we stalled that first year? So in effect, changing it now would mess that up because that's what I first encountered about these grants.
I don't think that's the reason why we stalled. I don't think we had a program structure in place.
Okay.
Yeah, I think staff was directed to reassess the scope and come back with a recommendation, which is what we did last summer. when we recommended the revised scope to focus more specifically on addressing the opportunity gap for low to moderate income school-aged youth.
Okay.
And the only other note I'll make, and it's certainly the discretion of this committee to decide how to disperse the funding, but we did in previous presentations to this committee, as well as to the Housing and Community Development Committee, talk about wanting to remain open to multi-year funding applications. And I know those are questions that Rachel got from agencies who ultimately ended up submitting multi-year funding applications. And so just want to note that we wanted to keep an openness based on committee feedback that we received previously. And so that's why that was on the table and ultimately recommended by the evaluation committee.
I'm almost thinking that we can model what's suggested in our conversation at 10 o'clock with Housing Trust Fund dollars. We made a recommendation today to move forward to full council with the idea in mind that we'll come back for a second round of funding for smaller projects. So what does the committee think about following the staff's recommendation right now? The full funding recommendation, and then coming back at a later date with more information about the 93 remaining from the pilot, and then a recommendation on a percentage of what we want to spend that's remaining of the 221, and then we could possibly get folks some funding going into their program year.
I can get behind that.
Yeah.
I am curious when we talk about the full funding recommendations, and it may help folks following along to have that slide back up, but do we have an understanding why the full funding didn't match the point metric? The same thing happened with our COVID-19 relief fund, ARPA funds. Like, we didn't just say that these are the highest equity and feasibility scores, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We stepped outside of that.
I see. So why were the top 5 or 6 not aligned with the scores?
Yeah. What is that differential between the scoring and the funding recommendation?
So I would have to look back to see exactly the math differential in it. But basically the evaluation panel, one just illustrated that or highlighted the fact that perhaps an organization is adept at completing an application, and that maybe when they reviewed their proposal didn't necessarily translate into the proposal that the evaluation committee would have preferred to see. And so that's why there's a bit of a discrepancy there. We also we worked with the Office of Data and Performance to build these spreadsheets, and there are some improvements that we can make too, just because we had some questions. If an evaluation score was not fully answered, if one question was missing, it didn't calculate in the scores. And so staff worked with all of the evaluators to the extent possible to get those completed, get those missing questions filled in. But there were some applications that were completely unscored or mostly unscored that were not considered as a part of the score, but could have contributed to some of the discrepancies between evaluator sentiment or preference and the scores.
Thank you. Yeah, Shanika, I support your suggestion.
All right. I know this is very uncomfortable for folks. It seems a little messy. I mean, stuff like this it's a competitive process, and we have a small pool of funds to work with. So just bear with us and, show some grace. It'll be all good. Sage, you wanted to say something?
I was just echoing my support.
All right, so it sounds like we're moving forward with the recommendations as presented by the evaluation team and staff. And then we'll come back for a second round that will consider partial funding with the remaining funds from the 277 and the remaining funds from the pilot.
Is that a motion?
That can be.
I can second that.
There you go.
All right, I'll do a roll call vote. Rachel?
Just a quick clarification point. I don't think it'll change the motion at all, but the current agreements from the pilot are set to end June 30th. So just curious around timing expectations from the committee with when we would come back with that potential second round of funding.
I don't know. First thing comes to my mind is July.
And my main reason for bringing that up, and Rachel's probably going to say the same thing, is we're going to need a little bit of time to work through the paperwork and just make sure any final invoices are processed. And so, Rachel, I'll need to lean on you on what would be realistic for us to foreseeably close out the current agreements before being able to come back to this committee and full council with confidence saying 93,000 or whatever that lesser dollar amount is available for consideration to make available to other agencies who've applied for funding.
Yes, we'll work with the current grantees to get a timeline of their final invoices and can at least have a more clear time frame for when to return back to this committee.
Is July realistic?
I'm hesitant to say yes. I just want to be able to be responsive to the needs of the current grantee.
Okay, we'll just keep it up in the air. I appreciate it.
And
All right.
Thanks to staff for walking us through this so much. I know I'm still learning the processes and understanding, and so often we come back to your recommendations anyways. But I appreciate the fluid process of letting us all understand and get to that same place.
Kim?
I wonder, because I imagine if anyone is in the speaker queue, they might want to speak to this. Can we amend our processes to hear public comment before we vote on this? We haven't voted yet.
We'll open it up to public comment. I think we have one person in the speaker queue.
Yes, we do. One moment.
Hi, this is Grant Millen, longtime Asheville resident. I want to talk about other things for 3 minutes, but I will say about your budget. Your perspective on equity when it comes to citizens with disabilities. There is no citizens with disabilities in equity. I'd like DEI to stand for Disability Equity Included. And I see Arc of Buncombe is in there, and that is like one of the only mentions of anybody in the disability ecosystem getting a piece of the Buncombe, the city of Asheville, let alone I should say Buncombe County has the Department of Health and Human Services, but in terms of knee rights and resources, there isn't anything from City of Asheville. And that Arc of Buncombe mentioned, I don't know if you're going to fund them for $25,000, but that's one of the only things I've seen in a long time that mentions all the disabled people in Asheville, and it's just a huge crisis out there. Asheville Watchdog, the last 2 stories in their downtown series are about people with disabilities, but they don't talk about a class or a community called citizens with disabilities, like the mayor's supposed committee on citizens with disabilities of City of Asheville, or the UN Convention on Persons with Disabilities. It's just like, it's the IDDD group. It's maybe people with physical disabilities at some point. And Brad Stein, your ADA coordinator, is supposedly their liaison. That's the city risk manager. How would Asheville African Americans feel if their perspective was a risk management perspective for City of Asheville? But I'm still ready. I want my 3 minutes at the end. You asked me to comment on budget issues in this strategic partners section, and I'm just trying to jump into that. I wasn't planning on speaking on that.
No problem. We'll hear you on the end. We have a motion and a second. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we call the vote? All right. Councilwoman Turner?
Aye.
Councilwoman Roney?
With full acknowledgement that we need a lot more funding for our youth, aye.
And same thing, we had a discussion in one of our earlier conversations before the application was submitted to the public. The application process was open to the public. We had a conversation about growing this fund. You had some ideas about the growing amount that the ABC submits to the general fund. I'm also thinking that some things that we can do in alignment with violence interruption that might be able to layer in here. I think we need to get a little more creative, because if our request will tap into almost $2 million, but we only have a pool of 300,000, then we always will turn people away feeling unfulfilled. And so let's see how we can grow this fund. I don't know how to do it right now, but I trust the brain power of this group. So we have a motion, a second, and the motion carries. Thank you, staff. I appreciate that. And about the 93 from the pilot.
Do we need a roll call? Wait, roll call vote for virtual?
I believe I did a roll call vote.
Yep. I'm getting lost in this one.
Yeah, I myself, and I think I had made comments before, but I do want to put out a consideration for the 93. I know it's very sensitive because organizations have so many reasons why they can't draw down fully on their award. I'm wondering if you can just give us some insight on what some barriers were. We are in the fourth quarter, so they don't have long to spend down on that, but I can imagine that we'll probably get a pool from that 93 that we can use to allocate partial funds.
Mm-hmm. So of the four, two have not submitted invoices, and then two have. So the two that have submitted invoices, it just wasn't of the amount and that we anticipated at this stage. So like I mentioned a little earlier, there's a chance that, going into the summer, there could be some increased programming. And so we might see some higher invoices than we have in the last 2 quarters. But based on the invoices that have been submitted so far, it does not seem likely that the full awarded amount will be spent for those 2 organizations. One of the organizations that does have a fully executed agreement and could submit invoices, we have been working and just haven't been able to get that connection. So can't fully speak to those reasonings for that. The third kind of bucket is just that one organization was not able to get all of the paperwork together to fully execute the agreement. And we've been in contact with all of the organizations that were awarded in the pilot throughout the entire process, but have not been able to get those documents compiled.
Okay, thank you, Rachel.
That made me think of another question. The 2 groups that you suggested sort of like technical support for, one of them was recommended for full funding, one of them wasn't recommended for any funding. Are they going to go through a separate process, or was that like within the funding bracket?
And I apologize. Those were broad takeaways from the conversation with the evaluation panel. So I do apologize for the confusion. Those are not full recommendations, but just a consideration from the evaluators that potentially one organization might benefit from some financial sustainability, technical assistance, but ideally we'd like to be able to offer technical assistance to all grantees, but have it be tailored to their needs. So if they're have already starting with some capacity, then we want to be able to work with a technical assistance provider and meet them where they're at, and not have them start sort of at the beginning, but build on what they've already got. And then another organization that might not be starting with as much capacity, we want to be able to kind of pair them with the appropriate assistance.
Thank you for that. And I still don't have quite the answer I was curious about. Because we recommended full funding for one of the groups that had suggestion for technical support, does that mean they'll have additional funding for technical support that was listed, or that would be a different process?
Yes, sorry, I misunderstood. The so in the recommendation, that staff recommended $25,000 for technical assistance, based on some the courses that were offered at WNC Nonprofit Pathways, for example. We believe that that amount of funding could cover all grantees. So basically, we would kind of work with grantees individually, kind of behind the scenes, to kind of pair them with the courses that they need.
And where will that funding come from?
That is recommended from the Strategic Partnership Fund.
Okay, thank you.
Brad, is your finger on the trigger? I kind of see you moving. Are you good?
I am just intently listening, Madam Chair, but no issues
okay,
for me.
Good. Again, I apologize for the uncomfortability here. We just have to work through it to make the best decisions, and we'll get there the best way we can. So we're going to make the motion carried for the full funding for the recommendations sent to us by the evaluation committee and staff. And we'll be back around. And even though it might not be the most satisfying decision that we make, even with partial, it's the best that we can do. So we want to put our best foot forward. We'll be back soon. And I trust staff to let us know the best timing for that. And we'll come up with a good pool of money to disperse partial. Thank you, Rachel Taylor. I don't do this a lot, but kudos to you. Hats off to you. I appreciate all your work, and everybody else who assisted with the evaluation and administrative support.
Will this be a council agenda on Tuesday or an upcoming agenda?
I believe
so. We're on a tight, rapid timeline, so we'll be finalizing documents this afternoon to take to council next week, the 25th.
All righty, that concludes our meeting. I want to give Grant an opportunity to come back for public comment, and then after he goes, we'll adjourn.
Caller ending in 2266, your line is now open.
So another thing I wanted to add is that your analytics, language, and accessibility update area, I brought this up 2 years ago, web content accessibility guidelines, which is something different and new compared to ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act requirements, and the accessibility page on the City of Asheville website mentions WCAG. And there's Brad's sign saying, we are working on this. And so the websites and Citizens with Disabilities is something to show an audit about what is the actual state per some independent WCAG and ADA experts. And I just wanted to say about language in the Inclusive and Accessible Government Project, part of the ARPA funding choices back in 2021, American Sign Language interpreters were budgeted for $15,120. And that's like the budget. That's your budget for the largest and most vulnerable constituency you all have, which is citizens with disabilities. I'm sorry if people think that someone else, an African American without a disability, is more vulnerable than anybody with a disability. But citizens with disabilities, your equity definition in writing needs to say, here's citizens with disabilities. They are all genders, races, sexual orientations, and creeds. It's not like a war, a civil war against African Americans and citizens with disabilities. That's not rational way to think about that about people with disabilities. But they're really in trouble, and omitting them in every turn and event, or just minimalizing them on a budget level. And they're minimalized on a budget level because they don't have an identity. And they don't have an identity in part because the mayor quit the mayor's committee on citizens with disabilities. And it was an African-American woman who got the mayor's committee on citizens with disabilities rolling, Mayor Bellamy. And paradoxically,
your time is now up.
All right.
Thank you, committee, for your time and your hard work. I'll see you next time.